Hello, and welcome to the podcast where friends discuss environmental policies from around the planet. Hello, guys, and welcome back to the Planet Policy Pals for Series 3!
Yay!
Yes, we're excited. And this time, Audra's energy is right. So, I'm Ala. I'm joined, as always, by my fellow Planet Policy pal, Audra. Hey, girl.
Hey girl, what's up?
Not much. It's just a boring Saturday of work and recording. The ends. So, if you listen to our trailer, which I hope you guys all listen to the trailer, Series 3 is called Storytime, and we're just going to go through some of our most notorious and infamous man-made environmental disasters through history. Really more recent history than anything. So that's kind of what we're going to be doing throughout the series. And you guys, don't forget to hit us up on social media. We are back. We are here. We are going to be flooding your timelines and your Instagram homepages.
Yeah.
I think that's what it's called.
You're gonna want to run away from us. You might want to block us. Please don't. But that's how this shit is real.
Yeah, it's very real. And don't block us. We have a lot of interesting news.
Yeah, we think it's interesting, so you should too.
Exactly these words. But yeah, before we jump into this week's topic, we wanted to take a moment to focus on recent hurricane tragedy, Hurricane Ida, that has devastated so many lives. Over 1 million people lost power in Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama. Hundreds of nursing home residents have been evacuated, both in the south and along the northeast. And there's just been a lot of damage, I think right now the death toll in the northeast was up to 40, and down here it was 12 last I checked. So instead of sharing environmental news as we usually do, we just wanted to let you guys know where you can donate, because this is really important. So just list off a couple places real quick. There's the Food Bank NYC. There's Long Island Cares. Both of these are food banks. And when they're not helping with hurricane emergency assistance, they do provide food for those in need. So it's always a good thing to donate to them. There's also Community Food Bank of New Jersey. And they also help to do cleanup as well over there. There's the Connecticut Food Bank, which doesn't just help people in Connecticut, but has a mobile food bank program as well. And down here in the South, we have the United Ways of Southeast Louisiana, which partnered with Channel 4 News to bring us the Hurricane Ida Relief Fund. So look into that. There's the Greater New Orleans Foundation, which does different hurricane disasters reliefs, but they also help to protect the environment. That's one of their initiatives. There's Imagine Waterworks, which works in art and science education, but also does hurricane disaster relief and regular community outreach. And then there's Relief Gang, which is a smaller community-based organization in Houston, and they travel around the country providing relief when disasters strike. They're helping Ida victims right now, so you can donate as well. We're going to make sure to put these up on our social media so that you guys can get in touch with them. They need all the help that you can give. So, this week we are going to discuss, I think, what's a very well-known tragedy, right? For many reasons, political, environmental. We're going to discuss Chernobyl, which happened in April of 1986. Chernobyl is a town in Ukraine, and people think that this was the product of a flawed reactor design coupled with a lot of serious mistakes by plant operators and a bunch of other stuff that we're going to tell you about today. So Audra is going to be the one telling us this story because she is really into this topic.
Yeah, for the right reasons, guys. Not that I get off of it or something. But it's something that's I think it kind of shaped the way that we started looking at nuclear reactions and especially nuclear reactor plants. So that's why I think it's a very important topic when you talk about human-caused disasters.
100%. 100%. So due to this situation, we had 2 plant workers die. Further, 28 people died within a few weeks. And we're going to talk a little bit about who was to blame and who was not to blame and who admitted blame, blah, 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 blah. But even as recent as today, complete remediation of the site has not been fully accomplished. So like Aja said, this really shaped how we see the world and how we deal with nuclear energy and nuclear power plants. And it's an example of the importance of industrial safety. So I cannot wait to hear everything that Ajwa is going to either remind me of or teach me today. Take it away, girl.
So the Chernobyl power complex, it lied about 130 kilometers north of Kiev, Ukraine, and about 20 kilometers south of the border with Belarus. And this power complex essentially consisted of 4 nuclear reactors of the RBMK 1000 design. Now, this is a Soviet-designed and built graphite moderated pressure tube type reactor, and it's kind of a water reactor. So it uses slightly enriched uranium dioxide fuel. So that's where, the radioactive material comes in. So units 1 and 2 were constructed between 1970 and 1977, but while units 3 and 4 of the same design, they were completed in 1983. Now, there were 2 more reactors that were under construction at the site at the time of the accident. But to the southeast of the plant, there's an artificial lake of something about 22 square kilometers. And it was situated beside the river Pripyat, I think that's how it's called, which was a tributary of the Dnieper that was also constructed to provide cooling waters for the reactors.
So Chernobyl is like in the Ukraine, which you already said that, and you said it was low density. Do you know what was the demographic of people who lived around this town?
So this area is kind of like, it has, like I said, like it's 30 kilometers off of the border with Belarus. So this is described as more of a Belarusian type woodland with very low population density. So about 3 kilometers away from the reactor, in the new city that was essentially built because of the reactor, Pripyat, there were 49,000 inhabitants.
Interesting.
And the old town of Chernobyl, so it's Chernobyl, Ukraine wants to call it Chernobyl, but in all of the Russian documents it's called Chernobyl, so that's what the difference is. So the Chernobyl town, it had a population of about 12,500, and it was 15 kilometers southeast of the complex. So within a 30 kilometer of the power plant, the total population you could assume to be 115,000 to 135,000 at the time that this incident occurred.
And this was like towards the end, I guess, of the whole Soviet Union situation. So I'm guessing things weren't in the best situation right then for those people. I'm not sure. I'm just assuming based on what I've read.
Yeah, no, I think there was a lot of diplomatic mess that was going on. So I think it was also a thing about placing blame by the authorities.
Yeah.
So I think it definitely played a part to that.
Interesting. I saw pictures on this article of how, like, even now, I guess the exact town itself is still kind of deserted, not the areas around it. And you can see, like, it looks like a ghost town almost. And I saw it and I was like, I have to visit this place. I have to go. There's like these creepy dolls in one of the pictures and it's just there with all this like decay around it. And I'm like, I would be so happy visiting this place.
Be careful because, it is a nuclear site.
Yeah.
So let's get into what happened on the day of.
Okay.
On 25th April, prior to a routine shutdown, the reactor crew at the Chernobyl 4, so like I said, there were 4 reactors. At the 4th reactor, they began preparing for a test to determine how long the turbines would spin and basically supply power to the main circulating pumps. And it was the loss of main electrical power supply. Now, this test had been carried out at Chernobyl the year before, but the power from the turbine ran down too quickly, so new voltage designs, they had to be tested.
So you're saying like were they like continuously running out of power, or like the output was just too low?
Yeah, like the voltage could not be regulated properly. So it was, I think it was like a surge of that.
Okay, so it wasn't like output was too low, it was that they couldn't regulate the output. Cool.
Yeah, because I think the reason why they had to carry it out, it was because of the power from the turbine, it ran too quickly. So the voltage regulator designs, like, they had to be tested.
All right.
So before a routine shutdown, the crew for the 4th reactor, they were testing the quality of its turbines and the amount of power supply that could be transferred to the main regulating pumps. Now, by the time that the operator moved to shut down the reactor was in an extremely unstable condition.
Unstable condition?
And in order to run through the test, like numerous operator action, like you have to do a bunch of things, and one of them is disabling the automatic shutdown mechanism that they had to do before they could test the reactor.
So that's one situation, right, where you would have to do that because you're testing. Why else would you need to disable an automatic shutdown? Like, they just wanted to see how much it could do on its own? Was that the thing?
So they shut down the automatic shutdown so that they could run the turbine themselves. And once the operator decided to shut down the reactor, xenon-135, which is an isotope of the radioactive xenon, that poisoning essentially began to occur within the fuel rods, and the thermal power of the plant, it continued to decrease.
Wait, what? That's insane. So like thermal power is increasing. We're having poisoning. Were there no sensors to detect these?
Well, that's where they came at fault, right? Like, I think a lot of it was shut down, a lot of it wasn't operating properly. So no, the thermal power was not increasing, but then there was a surge, right?
Okay.
So in order to return the thermal power and fuel rods to safe conditions, the control rods were removed, right?
Oh my God.
And that caused thermohydraulic instability in the reactor.
Okay, for all the like non-engineer people listening to this, the reason I'm like, oh my God, is because controls in whatever form they are super important. And it's basically these sensors and controls is how we keep track of stuff. So once you have to turn it off and you don't know that you already have a problem like xenon poisoning, yeah, it's about to be a catastrophe.
Yeah, they did that. After removing the control rods, at that point, only 4 of the 8 water pumps that were supplying this cooling water to the reactor. Remember how I said they built a pond there to have the cooling water? So out of the 8 water pumps, only 4 of them were working.
Jesus.
Yeah, like this is a mess on mess on top of a mess on top of another mess. So now the increase of steam voids in the cooling system, in the cooling water, that caused increased reactivity. And eventually, the xenon started to burn, which caused a surge in the thermal power.
Ah, oh my God.
Yeah. And, of course, the design characteristics of the reactor was such that the substantial damage to even like 3 or 4 fuel assemblies would and actually did result in the destruction of the reactor.
Jesus, a lot is happening right now.
And the overpressure, it basically caused the overplate of the reactor to become partially detached.
Wow.
It ruptured the fuel channels. It jammed all the control rods, which
my
by that
God.
time were only halfway down. And then this obviously caused like intense steam generation. It spread throughout the core. It was fed by water that was dumped into the core due to obviously the rupture of the emergency cooling circuit, causing a steam explosion and releasing fission products into the atmosphere.
Wow. Fission products. So just for everyone out there and maybe me, what are fission products?
Okay, so fission products are basically, so this was a uranium reaction, right? Depending on what kind of fission it is, since it was a uranium fission, the fission products from those are usually iodine and cesium.
Okay.
Different isotopes of that. So in this reaction, those were the ones that we actually saw the most. The initial radiation exposure in the contaminated areas was actually due to iodine-131 isotope, which were short-lived, and cesium-137 isotope, the main hazards.
All right.
So, about 2 to 3 seconds later, a second explosion. It threw out fragments from the fuel channels and hot graphite. Now, there is some dispute among experts about the character of the second explosion, but they believe that it is likely to have been caused by the production of hydrogen from the zirconium steam reactions. As a result of these explosions, 2 workers died.
That's super sad. So the initial explosion was not what spread the radiation then?
No, so the radiation, like the cesium and other radioactive isotopes, were actually blown by wind northward, and they went into Sweden, Finland, and other Scandinavian countries, like on other parts of the northern hemisphere to some extent. But during the first 3 weeks after the accident, the level of radiation in the atmosphere in several places, like around the world, was above normal. But these levels quickly receded. So,
Well, that's good.
yeah. So it was terrible, but it was contained. But also the graphite that was released and the fuel, so they became incandescent and they started a number of fires. And that was actually also why it got into the environment. A total of about 14 exabecquerel, which is the unit that we use to measure radioactivity, and it's equal to 1 nuclear decay per second. Now that was released, and over half of it was biologically inert noble gases.
What exactly are biologically inert noble gases? Are they just like regular noble gases?
So we know that noble gases are extremely chemically unreactive, so that's where the inert part comes in. But being biologically inert, they don't actually have an effect on the human tissue.
Okay, that's kind of good, right?
Yeah, so that's why there was less damage. But to give you a little bit of perspective of how much radioactive was actually released into the environment, so exposure from eating a banana is estimated that it's between 0.09 to 2.3 microsieverts. Now, this is also a unit that's used for measuring radioactivity.
Okay.
Now, let's say that for each banana, we get 0.1 microsievert per banana, right? Mm-hmm. Now, exposure from the Chernobyl and Fukushima equates to actually 6.48 trillion bananas.
Tera bananas.
And about 200 to 300 tons of water per hour was injected into the intact half of the reactor, but this was stopped after half a day because they were worried that the danger of it flowing into flooding units from 1 and 2 reactors.
So that would probably like spread.
Yeah, it would spread. So to put out the blaze, from the 2nd to 10th day after the accident, like from a helicopter, they kind of like threw something like 5,000 tons of boron, dolomite, sand, clay, and lead, like all hoping fire would be extinguished.
Yeah, just threw the kitchen sink at it.
Basically. So in 1991, there was a report that was done by the State Committee on the Supervision of Safety in Industry and Nuclear Power, and they tried to figure out the root cause of the accident. And they looked past the operator actions, by the way. It said that while it was certainly true that operators placed their reactor in a dangerously unstable condition, in fact, a condition that they said was virtually guaranteed an accident, but it was also true that in doing so, they had not actually violated any vital operating policies or principles, since no such policies actually had been articulated.
Oh, shit. That is a hell of a loophole. So that's kind of interesting, right? So because even though technically us reading this story would be like, oh, the operators were at fault, I guess then who would you blame? Would you blame the regulatory bodies or the company for not even having procedures or having those guidelines in the first place?
Yeah, I think so, because the operating organization, they were not even made aware of the specific vital safety significance of maintaining a minimum operating reactivity margin, or even like the general reactivity characteristics of the reactor.
Oh.
Which actually made low power operation extremely dangerous. So yeah, I think we could. It would definitely be there. They'd be at fault.
Damn.
Obviously, the incident caused the accident. I
mean, it's an incident,
the
right?
The difference, I keep saying, I know they want to call it an accident, but I want to call it an incident, and I'm going to do it.
Do it.
Because it was an incident, okay? It was somebody was at fault. The incident caused the largest uncontrolled radioactive release into the environment that was ever recorded for any civilian operation.
Crazy.
And, by the way, the large quantities of radioactive substances were released into the air for about 10 days.
Wow.
And this caused some serious social and economic disruption for very large populations in Belarus, Russia, and Ukraine.
Sure, because I mean, some people hypothesize that this accident was really what solidified the end of that like whole Soviet Union era, right? I mean, it was a lot to contain or to deal with afterwards. So speaking about containment, what drove the dispersion so far? Is it like the climate around there, wind?
Like I said earlier, it's actually a lot of it was wind. So the two radionuclides, we have the short-lived iodine-131, and then we have the long-lived cesium-137. These were the ones that were the particularly significant ones for the radiation dose. And that's what got to the general public. Now, it is estimated that like the xenon gas, about half of the iodine and cesium, like at least 5% of the remaining radioactive material in the 4th reactor, it was released in the accident. And it had 192 tons of fuel. So that was, a lot.
Yeah.
But most of the released material was actually deposited close by as dust and debris. But the lighter material was actually carried over by wind over Ukraine, Belarus, Russia, and even to over, like I said, other Scandinavian countries and Europe. Now, the casualties in this actually included firefighters as well, on top of the operators who catered to the initial fires on the roof of the turbine building. Now, all of these were put out in a few hours, but the radiation doses on the first day caused 28 deaths, and 6 of them were firemen by the end of July in 1986.
That is so sad. And I'm just wondering what that like acute radiation poisoning looks like, because I mean I know over time like radiation can lead to cancers and things like that, but these people died pretty quickly. I think you said within a few hours or the first day, right? So what does that look like exactly? Is it just like people just like dropping dead?
So the doses that the firefighters and the power plant workers received, they were actually high enough to result in acute radiation syndrome. So it occurs if a person is exposed to more than 700 milligrays within a short time frame, usually minutes.
Damn.
So, and these are like the symptoms that they have usually gastrointestinal problems like nausea, vomiting, headaches, burns, and fevers. So the whole body doses between 4,000 milligrays and 5,000 milligrays within a short time frame, and it would kill 50% of those exposed. With 8 to 10,000 milligrays, that becomes universally fatal. And the doses that were received by the firefighters that day were estimated to range up to 20,000 milligrays.
So wow, they were like really above that threshold then. They were not very well protected as they were working.
Yeah, they were dying.
Dang.
But other than that, the 2005 Chernobyl Forum study that they did, that and the United Nations Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation actually reports that apart from the thyroid cancer increase, there was actually not a lot of evidence of a major public health impact attributed to radiation, especially like 14 years after the incident. And even like they showed that there was no scientific evidence of increases in overall cancer or mortality in non-malignant disorders that could be related to radiation exposure. And one thing that was assumed that people, especially the cleanup workers, they might have an increase in leukemia, but there was little evidence that might suggest this. And so let's be clear that radiation-induced leukemia has a latency period of about 5 to 7 years. So any potential leukemia cases due to the accident would have already happened. And a low number of the cleanup workers who actually received the highest doses may have a slightly increased risk of developing solid cancers in the long term. But however, to date right now, we don't actually have any evidence that suggests any cancers being developed. They also said that the great majority of population is actually not likely to experience health consequences as a result of radiation from the accident. But many other health problems have been noted in the populations that they don't believe are actually related to radiation exposure. They also believe that a lot of people kind of internalized this and it drove them to doing a lot of other stuff that may have affected their health.
Do you feel like maybe that's a little bit of a cop-out, a little bit of a trying to protect yourself type situation? Or do you just think like, you know, maybe they're right, especially with the fear of nuclear energy that developed after all this?
I think it is, like you said, it is a very, it's a very tough line to walk, right? On one part, we have to be, if you talk about the environment, we have to actually at least pursue a little bit like nuclear energy, and we're going to have to. So I understand the part where they don't want to create so much of public outcry and these studies, they did these studies may be biased, we could totally do that, but there was a scientific committee, and you know how I like to give scientists the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah,
But
and
still,
there were a lot of studies, true.
yeah, both things could be true though. So of course after the accident, the next task was cleaning up the radioactive site so that the remaining 3 reactors could be restarted and the damaged reactor shielded was more permanent. So about 200,000 people who were the cleaners, the official word for them was the liquidators, and from all over the Soviet Union were involved in the recovery and the cleanup between 86 and 87. And they actually received really high doses of radiation, averaging around 100 millisieverts. And some 20,000 liquidators actually received about 250 millisieverts, with a few receiving approximately 500.
And you said the threshold was what again?
So you will get gastrointestinal problems around 4,000 and 5,000.
And did they receive this each day or over the entire time period?
So I think a lot of the radiations that they covered is entire lifetime period, because even when they were trying to resettle people into this area, the study that they had to do was how much radiation they've already been exposed to, how much can a human actually live off of, and how much will they get exposed to if they resettle in this area. So based on those calculations, that's when they actually decided like how they can resettle people. So I'm gonna go with that, but we can check this and put it on our social media for you guys.
That's it. Yeah, okay. That sounds good.
So yeah, that was actually what happened at Chernobyl. Then comes the law. What happened to the people, to the responsible people. So they had 6 officials and technicians at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant that went on trial on July 8, 1867. And the charges that they went under were blatant violation of safety regulations that caused the world's worst nuclear accident.
That's fair.
Yeah. And all 6, it included the plant's former director, chief engineer, and his deputy, rejected some of the accusations.
What?
Yeah. In fact, 3 of the defendants blamed the reactor's design or equipment for the disaster.
Doesn't that still involve them?
No, because it was not their fault, right? It was just how the reactor was made to be. It was gonna burst.
But they're directing the plants.
Yeah, doesn't matter. It's not their fault. But of course, Soviet officials, they don't fuck with nobody.
Mm-hmm.
They said that it was entirely a result of human error. The former assistant to the chief engineer at the place actually came out with a statement saying, with so many human deaths, I can't say I'm completely innocent.
You don't fucking say.
Somebody had a conscience in there. Surprise, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, eventually, the head of the Chernobyl nuclear power station at the time were sentenced to 10 years in a labor camp, which is the maximum possible in a disaster.
Oof.
Yeah. 3 other officials received some shorter labor camp terms. But those, the ones that received the 10-year sentences, were the plant director, the chief engineer, and his deputy. And they were found guilty of gross violation of safety regulations and creating conditions that actually led to an explosion.
I mean, somebody had to pay, and to say that you're not guilty because it's designed, like, bruh, you ran it. So did any of the sick people or families of the deceased ever receive any kind of financial compensation for what happened to them?
So the government, the Soviet Union, states that to this day they have paid $1.12 billion in compensation to the 116,000 people that they evacuated from the disaster. And they do say that it no longer poses a threat to the environment, but this is the Communist Party Central Committee, so take it as you will. But in total, like some 200,000 people are believed that they were evacuated as a result of the accident.
Wow. So this like had a really big impact, and I think like I would say it has changed the way we deal with nuclear accidents and stuff like that today, right?
Oh, for sure, 100%. It was actually one of the things that I think recreated the way that we're going to look at nuclear reactors. If we want to talk about changing history, leaving aside the verdict of history of how it, like the role of melting the Soviet Iron Curtain, there were some very tangible, practical benefits, as terrible it is to say that actually resulted from the Chernobyl accident. And the main ones were actually, like you said, reactor safety, especially in Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
So now, modifications have actually been made to overcome the deficiencies in all of the RBMK reactors that are still operating. And all of the reactors have now been modified by changes in the control rods, and they add neutron absorbers. Do you remember how I told you it was the control rods that actually messed up the whole thing?
Yeah, plus neutron absorbers, that's very important because, right, they were having like a lot of reactions happening that maybe could have been prevented.
Yeah. They also actually fixed the automatic shutdown mechanisms. They now operate faster, and they also introduced some other safety mechanisms. Automated inspection equipment has also been installed. So a German nuclear safety agency report says that a repetition of this accident is now virtually impossible.
Knock on wood, never again.
If it does, you know somebody actually wanted it to happen.
Yeah, that would be really fucked up.
Yeah, and it actually led to a lot of international programs that initiated. The International Atomic Energy Agency introduced safety review projects for each particular type of Soviet reactors. They were very noteworthy, and they brought together operators and Western engineers to focus entirely on safety improvements.
We love it.
The Nuclear Safety Assistant Coordination Center database now lists that Western aid totaling about around $1 billion for more than 700 safety-related projects in the former Eastern Bloc countries. In 1994, the Convention on Nuclear Safety was adopted in Vienna, which was another outcome. The Chernobyl Forum report actually said that some 7 million people are now receiving or are eligible for benefits as Chernobyl victims, which means that resources are not targeting those most in need. But of course, trying to remedy this is going to present some really daunting political problems.
Sure. So yeah, this is a fascinating story. I mean, obviously we've heard about Chernobyl, but I feel like today I learned even more about the details that I did not know before. So I'm super happy you brought up this topic. Something I read recently is that they finally got the license to start disassembling the current shelter. What's going on with that? Why are they disassembling it?
Well, okay, so disassembling is, I think, a strong word. It's already breaking apart, right? So they're just like trying to say, okay, we'll do it like in a proper manner. We won't just watch it come down to crumbs. We're going to take proper action on it. And of course, there's this fear of further radiation spreading, because if shelter isn't in place, what's going to happen? But any radiation that actually gets released probably won't make its way into the atmosphere, because for the past 9 years, they have been building a 32,000-ton shell around the shelter. And its parts were actually assembled in Italy, and then it was delivered to the construction site via 18 ships and 2,500 trucks.
So it's really big.
Yeah, it's actually the largest land-based object that was ever moved by humans.
Wow.
Yeah. It was rolled over to its final location in 2016. It is called the New Safe Confinement Structure, if anybody wants to look it up. But it's expected to keep the area safe and confined for at least another century, so it'll give workers enough time to remediate the site.
That's cool. We'll post a link to this on our social media if anybody wants to read about this new safe confinement structure. That brings us to the end of the episode. I had a lot of fun. Did you have a lot of fun, Adwa?
Of course, I was telling the story of one of the worst accidents in the history of humankind. But yeah, hella fun. I mean, I did actually have a lot of fun.
Yeah, we love to learn on this podcast. So I do have a question for you guys. Like Ajwa said, a lot of what happened after this accident led people to maybe some self-destructive behaviors because of the nuclear fear. And even though we were born after this disaster, even then, till today, people are still a lot more wary of nuclear energy due to accidents like this and Fukushima. I guess my question for anyone listening is, how do you feel about nuclear energy? I know how I feel. I 100% believe that nuclear energy is the gap between transitioning from fossil fuels to renewables. I don't know. It's like we have a situation where the technology is not catching up with the demand. I mean, it's getting there. Don't get us wrong. But yeah, anyway, let us know your opinion, because this is just our opinion. This is just how we feel. But we want to know what you guys think. So we're just going to highlight a quick organization that works in nuclear safety. It's the International Nuclear Safety Group, and it's actually under the International Atomic Energy Agency. That's the IAEA. So the INSAG, or INSAG, like I like to call it, is a group of experts in regulatory organizations, technical support, research, and academic institutions, and just some people who work in the nuclear industry. They're all experts, and what they try to do is provide authoritative advice and guidance on nuclear safety approaches, policies, and principles. And then they give recommendations and opinions on current and emerging nuclear safety issues to the IAEA and that whole nuclear community, which is used by countries all across the globe. So what they do is pretty important, just something to know about. And that is, like I said, our show. Next week, we're diving into another major disaster. In fact, this one was one of the largest industrial nuclear disasters, right? Chernobyl. But next week, we're going to talk about Bhopal, and we're going to talk about what till date is the world's largest industrial accident throughout human history.
It is the reason why I did chemical engineering.
Look at that.
I saw a documentary on it, and I was like, oh wow, you know what? I want to be the one who makes sure that does not happen.
It really shocked people. And I think it's a great example of how negligence can really ruin people's lives. So tune in. Check out our website, planetpolicypals.com, for updates and show notes, as well as references on everything we talked about today. Email us, leave a voicemail, rate us, review us, please. We're begging. If you have any cool trivia about Chernobyl or any other environmental disaster that humans have caused, let us know. Audience questions, comments, we kind of need them to record because we haven't been asking for many throughout our break. Follow us on Twitter at Planet Policy Pal, Instagram, Planet Policy Pals, like our Facebook page. Check out our YouTube page if you need captions when you listen. We have those for you. Stay safe and dry and hydrated during the summer. And until next time,
Keep learning, pals.